recorded online. So let's just acknowledge it. So like we said, it's been around all this time. Haman existed a good 500 years before Christianity. And the Romans also, and the Greeks also, and so many others. Now, Josephus, who lived in the time of the destruction of the temple, and was a Jewish reporter of that time, a journalist. He wasn't necessarily religious per se. Certainly his texts are not part of basic Judaism, but he dealt with it in his time. And he addresses Tacitus. I don't want to read the whole text here to you from Tacitus, but I think I may have mentioned it last week's year, how Tacitus, lodges all these complaints against the Jews. All types of complaints that we're this, that, and the other. Fifth column, basically the same thing that Haman said, all those very same claims. And then I have a text here from Josephus, responding to those, trying to refute them, which you might recall we discussed how Esther does not refute them, because oftentimes when you get into the mud, you just get dirty yourself. It's oftentimes futile to actually try to address all the issues. But already back then, we see how the biggest social problem facing Egypt, the plague, is blamed on the Jews. And all types of other things. You look at Nazi-era propaganda, and you look at these articles, this essay from Tacitus, who lived, when was Tacitus? Tacitus, anyone else from history? 56 to 117 of the Common Era. Okay, that's maybe the early period of Christianity, but as I showed you, anti-Semitism was around long before Christianity existed. Islam, for the most part, actually was not anti-Semitic. Well, even the term anti-Semitic, as we'll get to just now, is a misnomer, because technically speaking, Muslims are also Semites, right? But the term anti-Semitism was coined specifically about the Jews, which we'll get to just now as well. But the Sturmer described the Jews as our misfortune, and you see the same thing long before. Even in recent, I'm talking about contemporary issues, how many are blaming Jews for the problems in Russia, Ukraine? Putin calls Zelensky a Nazi. He's a Jew. Some Ukrainians call him lazy. I don't know who has shown greater leadership these days than Volodymyr Zelensky. COVID-19. There were those blaming Jews for COVID-19, calling Israel responsible for it. We rejected, they claim in every direction. I'm going to show you a video just now, and maybe read you some text by Rabbi Menachem Zemba, who was a survivor of the Holocaust, and shows us exactly these very issues as they are as contradictory as can be. Then they call us, we're wealthy and we're poor. We're socialists and we're capitalists. I don't want to really focus that much on all the accusations against us, because we know them. Okay? So the truth is, we should probably move on a little bit further and get more into what the Gemara says about it, which is really what I wanted to do today. A joke comes to mind that my father used to say when he was a kid, living in Russia, and there was all types of poverty. And one day there was a big delivery of shoes that arrived at a big chain, a huge retailer. They got a shipment of shoes. And there's a long line of people standing and queuing outside. So finally it comes the turns of each person to come by. They're all standing on the line. And the manager comes out and says, "We won't have enough for all of you. There's too many people on the line. Will all Jews please leave?" Okay? All Jews go home without new shoes. Eventually he comes out, he says, "Sorry, the shipment is delayed. We're not going to have enough for everyone. Will all non-veterans please go home?" Okay? Now the non-veterans go. Then he comes and says, well, sorry, we're not going to have enough. Will all those who are not loyal enough to the members of the Communist Party please go home? The next group, please. Eventually, there's like two veterans left standing on the line who are members of the Communist Party. And the manager comes out and said, I'm really sorry, the shipment never arrived, go home. So these two look at each other and says, the Jews always get off easy. The point I'm making is it's filled with contradictory, and it's absurd in every way. The accusations, the allegations against us, as you very clearly know. And whether it's 9/11 or COVID-19, somehow we're all at fault. And it continues onward and onward and onward. And unfortunately, that's the reality that we live in. Okay? That is the reality of the world. So to illustrate this, I want to put on a video about Rabbi Menachem Zemba. And after we watch the video, I will read to you something that he said. Like I said, he was a survivor of the Holocaust. Sorry, he was not a survivor. He was murdered in the...
On the east bank of the Vistula River, in the Warsaw suburb of Praga, a Jewish boy was born in 1883 and named Menachem, he who brings comfort. His father, Elazar Zemba, died shortly after, and the boy was raised by his grandfather. He became rapidly known as a dazzling genius and formidable Torah scholar, corresponding with the best Torah minds of his era. Menachem Zemba married at age 18. His wealthy father-in-law supported him for 20 years while he studied and put pen to paper, authoring over 10,000 pages of original Torah insights, including commentaries on Maimonides' magnum opus and on the Jerusalem Talmud, and 4 volumes of halachic responsa. His fame spread globally. He was offered rabbinical positions, including the office of the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, but he humbly shunned leadership. Leadership was thrust upon him in 1935 by order of the Grand Rabbi of Ger. The humble rabbi joined the Warsaw Rabbinate and proved his worth, becoming a world authority on Jewish law and a foremost spokesman for Polish Jewry. Before reaching age 40, Rabbi Zemba was appointed honorary secretary to Moetzes Gedolei HaTorah, the Council of Great Torah Sages, populated by sages twice his age. In 1937, he twice addressed the full assemblage and was treated with awe. Then the Nazis arrived. Jewish Warsaw was reduced to a ghetto. 460,000 people were imprisoned in just 1.3 square miles. Starvation, disease, deportation, murder. Despite repeated offers of escape, Rabbi Zemba refused to abandon his flock. To them, he was a rare pillar of comfort. As one of a handful of rabbis who survived in the ghetto until its final days, he rallied his desperate brethren with powerful messages of hope and determination. He recorded an insight into the nature of anti-Semitism before the war. In light of his subsequent experiences under Nazi depravity, his words ring with timeless poignancy. There are those who seek to identify legitimate causes for the hatred of Jews. However, reality has shown that there is no legitimate reason. Anti-Semitism has no justifiable cause. The haters simply choose to hate God's people. This is demonstrated by the fact that Jews are hated for being capitalists and also for being socialists. They are hated because they are overly ambitious and sharp-minded, and also because they are indolent and parasitic. They are hated because they are too religious and conservative, and also because they advance progressive and secular ideas. The reasons for this hatred are consistently contradictory and have not an ounce of logic behind them. Shortly before Passover, 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising erupted. Amid furious fighting and flames, Rabbi Zemba calmly conducted a Passover Seder as if nothing was amiss. But on the 5th day of Passover, April 24, 1943, Rabbi Zamba was gunned down by Nazi bullets. The community he shepherded with love and sacrifice came together at terrible risk to bury their beloved rabbi in a temporary grave. His family was deported to Treblinka. None survived. His lifetime of copious writings rose to heaven in the Warsaw fires. Hardly any of it survived. In 1958, his body was exhumed. Tens of thousands of people amassed, including an array of leading Jewish sages, to lay the heroic rabbi to eternal rest in dignity. Reality has proven that this righteous man was right. There is no legitimate reason for the hatred leveled in each generation against the innocent men, women, and children of the Jewish people.
Okay, so as you saw on this video presentation, how Rabbi Zamba shows us the contradictory elements within anti-Semitism, because he was living there in Warsaw, experiencing it himself. You're calling us socialists, you're calling us communists, you're calling us ambitious, you're calling us lazy, you're calling us all these different names, and it doesn't make a difference because they're basically blaming us for all the problems of the world. And as he puts it in his book, he writes, those who seek to identify legitimate causes for the hatred of Jews, however, reality has shown that there is no legitimate reason. Anti-Semitism has no justifiable cause. The haters simply choose to hate us. And he goes on to explain this. In each society, anti-Semitism chooses the issue that will most inflame and incite the masses, the people in their time. Right? They accuse the Jews of being on the wrong side of the issue. And this is why we end up with these contradicting claims about Jews from one society to the next, or from one generation to the next. Whether it was back in Egypt, and we'll start talking about that next week as we prepare for Pesach, or in the Purim story, or till this very day. As you can see, all these contradictory complaints, whether we're too religious or too secular, etc., etc. So it's been around for millennia, and the accusations made about the Jews continue to this very day, and like we said, they are contradictory. Yes, there are some that might use real, true claims, right? Yes, we do have our problems, not to deny them. But the anti-Semitism is not one that's concerned genuinely with the problems that Jewish people perhaps have. And unfortunately, the answers and the refutations and dealing with them has never really proven to resolve the problem. Till this very day, I don't think anyone's ever come up with the fact. There are people who still claim that Jews have horns, right? Horns. All these types of complaints, at the end of the day, it doesn't get us too far. Sorry. So, I have the wrong slide up. Just a second. We'll get to the next slide in a minute. All right, don't confuse it with the facts. So, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't, that the Board of Deputies or whoever tries to deal with these things shouldn't try to refute the false claims. Right? We should. And that will certainly, to some degree, hopefully, keep some people away from their anti-Semitic views and perspectives, but I don't think it's a complete fix. And, just to say some Jew did me wrong in business is a reason to hate all the Jews, that's a Haman. Haman didn't like Mordechai and said he was going to annihilate all the Jews. So the second point is about the name anti-Semitism or anti-Semite, because who came up with that name? I told you I'll get to that. That was the haters themselves, right? They intended to make Jew hatred sound like some kind of a respectable theory. like an idea that's worthy of discussion and debate, if not respect and admiration, some people are proud of their anti-Semitic status. So the name is meant to evoke such terms like anti-nationalist, and there are people proudly anti-nationalist, or anti-separatist, or anti-communism, or anti-monarchy. Well, anti-Semitism was meant to achieve that. So for that, I want to just take you a little bit into the background, since we talked about it and we haven't really delved too deep into it. Let me go into Robert Michael Philip Rosen, the Dictionary of Anti-Semitism, from the earliest times to the present. I'm going to read to you a little bit from this. Mar Wilhelm, 1818 to 1904, German writer, political theorist, and agitator. In 1879, Mar founded the Anti-Semites League, the first organization devoted exclusively to promoting political anti-Semitism. Mar's organization reflected his secular racism, which existed inconsistently alongside his religious anti-Semitism. His self-proclaimed goal was to free Christianity from the yoke of Judaism. Mar coined the term anti-Semitism, which for him denoted a secular racial hatred of Jews. So in the past, they could say it was a difference of religion. Now, he clearly tried to make it not about religion at all, just the very race of Jews. Now, given the absurdity of anti-Semitism, not to speak of the horrific suffering that it caused to so many, it should be obvious to us all not to dignify this, ludicrous terminology, to try to refine it, to make it sound like something sophisticated. There was a story, Glickl of Hameln. She was a Jewish businesswoman in Germany during the second half of the 17th century. And she authored a memoir and recounts a story that occurred in 1687. Okay? 1687. I want to read to you. The story has some very interesting twists and turns, and obviously limited in our time. I'm not going to go through everything. But let me just go. In short, a non-Jewish resident of Hamburg, Germany, his name was Diedrich Meinecke, Germany. He was sentenced to death by the local authorities for murdering 2 innocent Jewish men. Now, this was too much for the anti-Semites of Hamburg. They couldn't allow one of them to lose his life for nothing. After all, it's noble, it's pious to kill a Jew. So on the day of the sentencing and execution, there was intense anti-Semitic agitation among the masses in Hamburg. The Hamburg Senate, aware of this agitation, issued an order that anyone caught hurting any Jew in connection with this case would be severely punished. Okay, it's a country. Germany was supposedly an enlightened country where it took the care of its citizens into consideration. Very important. Let me read to you what Glickl writes. She says, on the day the murderer was sentenced to death, there was a commotion in Hamburg that had not been seen there for a long time. Any man sentenced to death. It's written in Yiddish. Translate. The lives of all the Jews in danger due to the extreme rishus, what the rishus is, the evil, the wickedness, has been roused. She's describing a pogrom in her time. Now, thankfully, it all ended well, without harm to the Jews, and it was sorted. But notice how she describes the anti-Semitism, what's going on. And she used the term rishus. Rishus means, that spiteful, evil behavior. It was a real wicked instigation. Now, I guess that's why we could use the word evil here. Real evil. A real evil wickedness. Now, of course, the question people always ask, why the Jews? This is why I chose to talk about this today on Tainus Esther. Today is the fast of Esther. It's the day before Purim. Before we celebrate, we have to know what we're going to celebrate tonight. So, of course, we can analyze anti-Semitism from today to tomorrow. I really don't have an interest in doing that right now. Sure. Okay, it's a good question. Are we doing the Megillah here? If I do it here, I'll have to be at 9 o'clock because I have a function at Rankislachter at 10, then at Willowbrook, then at Silwood Lodge at the various retirement facilities. So if you guys do want a Megillah reading here at 9 o'clock, you want one? Maybe a little later. Maybe we'll call it 9:15. Okay. You're okay. You guys want to come 9:15? Doesn't the shul have a Megillah reading here? 7 a.m. Usually, Dov Ber Unterslag will probably do it. I assume Dov Ber, because I'll be doing it at my shul earlier at probably also at 7. Right. So the truth is, I could do it at my shul at 7. I could come here and do it at 9. Then I could be at Rankislachter, Willowbrook, Silwood, and I got a list of other places where we're sending students. Thank God. Okay. So tonight will be the Megillah. We'll remind ourselves why the anti-Semitism, the whole story. But I can't answer why it exists, right? But I want to share with you something very interesting from the Gemara on the Megillah that we're going to read. Before I do so, I want to first share with you something I have here from Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. I just want to take this call. Sorry about that interruption. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to read to you something from Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory. Yeah. The blood libel is as ancient as can be. It was already in the times of the temple, they were claiming it. So it was around before Christianity, but it was used by Christian anti-Semitism as well. And it was used as recently as a century ago, the most famous story, the Mendel Bayless trial as well. So unfortunately, it's been around for... Hashem gives free choice to people. Pharaoh had the free choice, as does any anti-Semite or any hater. Yes, so in Pharaoh's case, there was a hardening of his heart. We'll get back to that next week. I think that God gives us free choice. I don't think God, tells people to be anti-Semitic and to hate Jews.
No, there's a reason why he puts it there. There is a reason.
Well, I'm sure it's certainly to make us stronger. There must be certain reasons, no doubt.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let me read this to you from Rabbi Sacks. He says there has been an almost endless set of speculations about what the cause of anti-Semitism really is. Some have seen it in psychological terms: displaced fear, externalization of inner conflict, projected guilt, the creation of a scapegoat. Others have given it a socio-political explanation. Jews were a group who could conveniently be blamed for economic resentments, social unrest, class conflict, or destabilizing change. Yet others view it through the prism of culture and identity. Jews were the stereotyped outsiders against whom a group could define itself, and the list goes on and on. Yet others noting the concentration of anti-Semitism among the very faiths. Just a second, guys. Sorry for disturbing the share. Oh, okay, next. That trace the descent to Abrahamic Judaism, such as Christianity and Islam, favor a Freudian explanation in terms of the myth of Oedipus. We seek to kill those who gave us birth. It would be strange indeed if so complex a phenomenon did not give rise to multiple explanations. Now, you could explain it from today to tomorrow. Okay, Rabbi Sachs is not necessarily agreeing with any of these explanations of why the Jews. But we have to turn to Jewish sources as well, which is why I'm going to look at a Gemara, Megillah, that analyzes the whole story of Purim, and hopefully will give us an idea relevant to today's discussion of what we're discussing here, and give us a better idea of what to do and what perhaps not to do to outsmart and defeat anti-Semitism. So the idea, yeah?
Would you say that
Mm-hmm. Well, according to some, there would be no salvation. We might be infidels or other terms if we don't join their religion, but there's multiple religions that believe this way. Judaism is non-proselytizing. Judaism says that people can be whatever religion they want. We do promote belief in one God, but we don't interfere in others. True. Yeah. So let's go into the Megillah. In the 3rd chapter that we're going to read tonight, we learn of the plan contrived by the wicked Haman, senior advisor to King Ahasuerus. His plan to annihilate, to exterminate the Jewish people. And so it describes how Haman goes about getting the king's approval. How he approaches King Ahasuerus and brings to his attention, as we discussed yesterday, Yeshna Am Echad, there's the certain people. Yesterday I told you Yeshna is a reference to that they were sleeping, and that's why in chapter 6 we go on to the king can't fall asleep. That whole story, that we were asleep, so Hashem was so to say asleep. That was a separate discussion. But Haman asks permission to destroy the Jewish people, and in fact he offers a very handsome son of Aseres Alafim Kikar Kesef, 10,000 silver cubes to go about the annihilation of the Jewish people. He's willing to pay big bucks. Now what happens? Does the king want his money? No, what does the king say? What's that? He says, no, I don't need that money. Thank you. The king does not need much convincing. He tells Haman, Ha-kesef sun lach, the silver you can keep. And to these people, do as you please. Now, that's the words of the Megillah that we're going to read tonight. But the Gemara, the Talmud, gives a very interesting insight into the psyches of Haman and Achashverosh. I don't know why the video keeps turning off. I apologize. The Gemara gives us a little insight into the psyches of Haman and Achashverosh that I want to analyze and discuss with you. So let's go into the Gemara tractate Megillah for a moment. Zak the Gemara, Mashal Achashverosh, this story of Achashverosh and Haman, the Talmud says we can use a parable to gain insight and understanding in the perspectives of why Haman's offering money and why Achashverosh is rejecting it. Says the Gemara, it's similar to two individuals. One of them has a tall mound in his field, whereas the other has a ditch in his field. Okay? Now, the owner, the ditch, thinks to himself, I wish I could buy that tall mound because, I have a big swimming pool that I don't need in my house, in my estate. I want to fill it in. Now I could go and hire a company, or I could turn to my neighbor with the ditch, with the mound. And if I could buy the sand off him, the dirt, the earth, the dust, I'll fill my pool my ditch and I don't have to worry. So, says the Gemara, the owner of the mound said to himself, Oi, now I gotta call the schleppers to come and pull and take away the mound. It's gonna cost me an arm and a leg. Not long afterwards, these two fellows, they meet each other. The owner of the ditch said, sell me your mound. The owner of the mound said, take it for free. You'll do me the greatest favor. Says the Gemara. When the Talmud is giving us this analogy, it's usually to deepen our understanding of a perplexing idea. So before I go a little bit deeper, let me just put this image back up. We have here, Haman wants to destroy the Jews. He offers all this money to the king, but the king says, you don't have to convince me. I don't need the money. Do with this people as you please. And the Gemara gives us the analogy of the person with the ditch and the person with the mound. The one with the mound says, I'm more than glad to give it to you. Okay, so let's try to analyze this story. Our slides are getting a little bit slidey today. Okay, but you see the pictures, let's go on. So my question to you, my friends, is what deeper lesson, insight, can we learn from this analogy? Right? What is not understood in the story that requires the help of this parable, this analogy? I have another question for you, my friends. The Talmud equates Haman's attempt to murder the Jews to an owner of a field who needs a pile of dirt to fill up his ditch. But there doesn't seem to be any link between the original story and this part in the analogy. Haman wasn't trying to fill anything up. He was trying to destroy, to annihilate the people. So the Talmud is teaching us that there are two dimensions to anti-Semitism. You ready? One dimension of anti-Semitism is the superficial Achashverosh dimension, who simply sees the Jews as a mountainous field. The Jews are different, and therefore he sees their presence in his midst as an unwanted and detestable thorn in his side. Now we can compare this anti-Semitic sentiment, this perspective, to typical racism and xenophobia. I don't like you because you're different. Whether it's the color of your skin, whether it's because you keep different traditions, you cook different foods, whatever it might be. You're different, so I despise you and I want you gone. That's plain and pure racism. Okay? Just as the owner wants the pile of dirt removed from his field. That's one aspect. Now, if this were the sum total of anti-Semitism, it would seem to leave us with no choice other than to be hated. We're different. The only way for the hate to abate would be for us to completely disappear. Because how could I change the color of my skin? How could I change my DNA? How could I change my heritage? I'm a Jew. And it's the same with any other racism, xenophobia you could think of. But here comes the continuation of the Talmud's analogy. It's not just about Achashverosh's mound, that we're a thorn in his side, but it's also about Haman's ditch, which expresses a deeper dimension of that hate. It uncovers a deeper reason of why hate exists. The Talmud calls Achashverosh a foolish king. We discussed this many times. As a fool, he didn't understand the true nature of this hate. Haman knew why he hated the Jews. It was because they made him feel like he was the ditch in the field. And this is something to discuss. Haman had all the conventional gifts of a good life. He had a wife, Zeresh, the Megillah describes. He had 10 children, nice big family. He was a dignitary, a diplomat. He had power. He's famous. What else do you want, right? Yet he sensed this gaping void, something that made all that he had seem meaningless. The inner void in him was triggered that when he encountered a Jew, when he saw Mordechai, there was something in him that just couldn't stand him. There was something in him that made him feel that ditch, that inner void. Let's read it in the Megillah. Haman comes home and he tells his wife and family all about his experience in the day. Let's read chapter 5. Haman told them about his magnificent wealth and his many children, and how the king had promoted him and advanced him above all the other officials and royal courtiers. And then he goes on. Haman goes on, he says, what's more, he thinks he's such a big deal. He says, that Queen Esther, the only person she invited to this party besides for the king was me. That's how important I am. And guess what? Tomorrow, I'm invited to another party. And he goes on. He's describing how impressive his life is. But it's all worthless, he says. As long as I see that Jew Mordechai roaming the palace courtyard. What bothers him? He has everything in the world, but that one Jew bothers him. He's the most powerful person in Achashverosh's kingdom. And in Achashverosh's instruction, wherever Haman walked, everyone, all the ministers, all the servants, all the citizens had to bow before him. All except for Mordechai. In general, that idea, I'm just going to give a side note. When it says in the Megillah, Mordechai lo yichra v'lo yishtachava, it's not saying in past. You would think the Megillah is generally written in past tense. It's a story that happened. When it comes to these words, it actually is written in the future tense. He doesn't, or he won't prostrate, he won't bow to Haman. And maybe it's because the Megillah is describing that us as Jewish people should not be bowing to the pressures of the world. Not then, and not any time in the future. We will not. And this is the void that Haman has. Regardless of all the impressive power that he possesses, and all the good, and you name it. All that is not worth it for me, he says. He's infuriated. Mordechai's refusal to bow didn't just make him angry. There was something about Mordechai, the Jew, that made Haman feel that his entire life and fortune was worthless. As he himself says it, V'chol zeh einena shavali. But all this means nothing to me as long as I see this Jew. What does that tell you about Haman? And about his relationship? And about anti-Semitism? All this means nothing to me. That's the ego. When Haman confronted Mordechai, he was reminded this person's a member of the Jewish nation. That they are different. Haman somehow, he was a person whose life was about more than just self-preservation. It wasn't about live and let live. He saw someone committed to living a life of a higher purpose, of a Torah-dictated life, and that to him was somehow a great inconvenience. Somehow, nothing is worthwhile for him. And this realization reminded Haman of a deep void inside of him. That's what the Gemara is telling us. Most of his day consisted of obsessing over this selfishness, this narcissism that one Jew doesn't bow to me. Regardless of all that he's got, doesn't matter about his family, his wealth, his power, his politics, but one Jew doesn't bow to me. That's his problem. The Torah teaches that God created the human being, every single human being, for a purpose. So the upshot of this message is that God created us not as needy beings who would require pleasure for happiness, but as purposeful beings, my friends. We require pursuing our purpose for happiness. If we fail to satisfy this, it leaves us feeling empty. So I always say, for me, 7 days without studying Torah makes 1 week. When Haman saw this man, he was reminded of, this man lives a life of purpose, and I'm empty. There's a jealousy. And it caused him to resent not just Mordechai, but all the Jews. It's a jealousy like you described, Harold. Absolutely. No doubt. Yeah. The Gemara tells us, Haman was a descendant of Amalek, yeah. The Gemara says, where did God give us the Torah? On Mount Sinai. Why Sinai? So one time the Gemara says the word Sinai comes from the word Sina, which means a hatred, a jealousy. I'm not going to go into all the sources, but there are many. There's a famous quote, since Rosalind mentioned Hitler Yamach Shema. What did he say? He said, conscience is a Jewish invention. It is a blemish like circumcision. That's what Hitler said about the Jews. Okay? And yeah, I guess that's that conscience, that the jealousy of. So that was Haman's resentment of us. To feel happy and content, or to fill his ditch, he figured that he would remove the trigger. If there were no Jews, he assumed he wouldn't feel that acute emptiness. And that's why he plotted with Achashverosh to rid the world of Jews and thereby to fill his ditch. That was his plan. Now, there was a deeper option. There was a better option through which Haman could have solved this problem. Instead of Haman attempting to eliminate the trigger of his feeling empty, he could have filled this void in a positive way. He could have become a source of good instead of evil. He could have learned. You're envious of something, learn from them. He could have embraced the message of divine purpose and chosen to live in a more meaningful and purposeful way. Every human being, regardless of one's religious status, regardless what religion they belong to, has a role to play in fulfilling the divine purpose of creation. God didn't create everybody as Jewish. We Jews don't hold the copyright on morality, on ethics. We embrace the Jewish role, the Torah's way of life. And anyone else can follow whatever moral, ethical, purposeful way of life that they choose to. Most people probably do. And they don't have a ditch. They don't feel empty. They have no reason to hate us. We're not in their way. right? In fact, they often love us. In many cases, many cases, it happens to be, they have risked their lives to save us. Haman could have chosen to follow that route too. Right? It was unfortunate that he tried to overcome his void by removing the physical presence of the Jewish people and because we reminded him of that conscience, of having direction, meaning, purpose in life. So the Gemara is telling us that the implication, the idea of this story of the ditch and the mound, and I think it's important because the truth is that more important than any explanation in why anti-Semitism exists is the orientation, the purpose of this, why the Gemara even tells us. A reason for anti-Semitism that turns inward, that in one way or another blames Jews or Judaism, that seeks to alter our heritage, is most often problematic and wrong. Now, there's obviously nothing wrong with looking inward in the sense of becoming better. There's no doubt that as a Jewish people, we have individuals who are flawed, and even the greatest and holiest people sometimes make mistakes, right? Throughout the generations, we've always tried to improve ourselves, to become better people. We discussed this so many times that our Torah is filled with stories of mistakes. Now, it's a little bit tough to say that the righteous made mistakes, but the Torah tells us these stories, so we should learn from them, right? And there were many instances throughout our history when Gedolei Yisrael, the greatest of our leaders, called on Jews to refrain from certain behaviors. You don't have to flaunt your wealth. You don't have to flaunt your success if it's going to make others jealous. You don't want to arouse anti-Semitism. Yes, we should live in a free society where everybody could live freely without hatred, without being discriminated against. But that is, looking inward, there's nothing wrong. But the explanation that we just explored turns outward. It is true there's lots of explanations one could give. Right? We identify the hate to be within the hater. He has a void to his lifestyle choice. We just remind him of his problems. Don't blame yourself for anti-Semitism. It's not your fault. It's the anti-Semite's fault. Right? When a kid is born, we don't think that the picked on child should blame himself and change his personality or his behavior because some bully picked on him. Unless you think that is the way to stop bullies. I don't think so. Right? Bullying is often a result of the bully's own low self-esteem. Right? They're feeling threatened and insecure, and they find some way of picking on another, of dealing with their own misery. If the bullied child starts contemplating, which usually does happen, how to change and how to become like the other, just so, I was telling my kids yesterday, as a kid, and years have gone by, I used to be very thin, very skinny. And I remember when I was 12, 13 years old and I had a classmate. In hindsight, that guy was very big. He was probably dealing with his own self-esteem of his being overweight. So what would he do? He would pick on me all day and call me all types of names, how I'm skinny. And why did God make me so skinny? And I used to feel so stupid that I'm so skinny. I purposely fattened myself up. I would come home and eat sandwiches and do anything I can to become fat because this kid would make fun of me for being so skinny. Now I got to do the reverse. Not so easy. So you have to remember that Jew hatred, just like the bully, is in the hater, not in the victim. It has nothing to do with our choices. That I think is very, very important. And I want to read that to you from Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, blessed memory. Beautiful writing. It just reminds me of, before I say that, of two Jews who were being killed, and one starts to say Shema or something, And the other one says, shh, don't get us into bigger trouble. They're being killed, right? Sometimes we have it in us that we're at fault for the hate. There's no doubt that we have Bernie Madoff some problems, and that causes hate of Jews. But would all Italians be blamed? Will all Russians now be blamed? Is it right for us to go pick on Boris down the street because of Putin? No. And all Jews should not be blamed because of one bad apple. We have to realize that. That's where it changes from hatred of an individual who's done wrong to the whole people. Where Haman hates all the Jews because he despises Mordechai. Says Chief Rabbi Sachs, Jews must fight anti-Semitism, but never internalize it. That is easier said than done, of course. If you're hated, it is natural to believe that you are hateful, that the defect lies in you. It really does. Hate exists in the mind of the hater, not in the person of the hated. Jews have faults. Chief Rabbi is being straightforward. Judaism is a religion of self-criticism and repentance. There's no doubt about that. But those faults have nothing to do with those of which they are accused by their enemies. Anti-Semitism tells us about anti-Semites, not about Jews. One of the mistakes made by good, honorable, and reflective Jews was to believe that since Jews were hated because they were different, they would try as far as possible not to be different. Some converted to Christianity, to Islam, to other religions. Many assimilated. Others reformulated Judaism. Right? We reformed it in order to not be so Jewish. Okay? To eliminate as far as possible all that made Jews and Judaism distinctive. When these things failed, as they did, not only in 19th century Germany and Austria, but also in 15th century Spain, some internalized that failure. Thus was born the tortured psychology known as Jewish self-hatred. And that's a whole different can of worms to open up. Extreme examples of internalizing anti-Semitism are conversion and complete assimilation. Okay, those are known where people, convert out of Judaism. Others take it to a lesser extreme. Perhaps we should give up on some of the traditions of Judaism. Right? Maybe we shouldn't keep Shabbos because, they hate us because we don't work on that day. Maybe we shouldn't eat kosher because we can't sit with them in a restaurant. Right? Others argue that Jews should give up on the claim that they're the chosen people, as though that would help reduce anti-Semitism. You know that in 1945, the Reconstructionist movement of Judaism, I don't know if you ever heard of them, but it's popular in America, they published their first prayer book, and it said, modern-minded Jews can no longer believe that the Jews constitute a divinely chosen people. And they chose to say that this is the best way to answer the charge that the chosen people doctrine has been the model for theories of national and racial superiority. That we are hated because we think we're better than everyone else. Remember that when we say the chosen people, we are talking about we are chosen to follow the Torah. Yes, that's what we are chosen for. We never, ever went into a model of supremacy better than anyone else. Yes, Malcolm? That's what Hitler said. Yeah. 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 Now, secularism, let's use that as an example, assimilation. For some people, it's just a matter of convenience. I don't think it was an answer to anti-Semitism. For many people, it's just easier not to keep kosher or Shabbos and all those things than it is to do so. But there were Jews who specifically assimilated so as to escape anti-Semitism. There were Jews who converted to Christianity and other religions to escape anti-Semitism. Not out of convenience, like I said. I said, there's two reasons why a person assimilates. And it didn't help for either reason. None of them helped. Okay, those attempts were unsuccessful in solving anti-Semitism. Okay, the German Jews who assimilated, most German Jews were not religious. And yet, they were hated by the Nazis. When Hitler talked about the Jew, he probably never saw a religious Jew because Germany hardly had any. And he even talked about exactly what you're saying, Bracha. Just a little bit of Jewish blood. A quarter Jewish. First of all, there's no such thing as a person's a quarter Jewish. Okay, I remember when my mother was in the hospital, we had a representative, a lawyer. This guy said he's a quarter Jew, the wrong quarter, because he said it was his father's father who was Jewish, not his father's mother, and neither was his mother's parents. Right? A quarter Jewish. Halachically speaking, either you're a Jew or you're not a Jew. It doesn't matter if you're, no such thing as a quarter. But to Hitler, there was such a thing as a quarter Jew, right? If a person had 1/4 Jewish, they were to be exterminated. So by changing themselves to try to solve anti-Semitism, that never helped. Okay, there was an academic debate about this issue between Bibi Netanyahu's father and Yitzhak Beyer. Beyer considered the vast majority of converts in Spain as anusim. You know what anusim? They were forced, okay? So he felt that they chose to live a double life while remaining committed to their original Jewish faith. And the inquisitors, they accused the conversos of being Marranos. What does Marrano mean? Pigs. Why? You're pretending to be. But there were many who didn't even pretend. They said, to hell with Judaism, who needs this hatred? Still didn't help them. Okay? By changing themselves to solve anti-Semitism, it didn't as well intended as they were, it really didn't help. Okay? The problem is not in us. And the solution will not come from changing ourselves. Okay? You have to realize that the problem is in them, the anti-Semite. So anytime you find yourself thinking about or discussing the why of anti-Semitism, know that your actual answer matters less than the overall approach. It's not only if we change this custom or that custom or the other custom. That's not the point. At the end of the day, it's they who have to change. So, this isn't something that we really can do anything about from that perspective. And the other problem that we discussed is ourselves. When the famous story from Rabbi Twersky. Rabbi Twersky describes he's once riding on the bus, and this lady, a Jewish lady, is giving him a hard time about how religious he looks. So he tells her, by the way, I don't know what you're talking about, because the lady was talking to him in Yiddish. Right? She's telling him in Yiddish, why do you have to be so old-fashioned, so outdated? So he says, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not Jewish, I'm Amish. And then she says, oh, I'm so sorry. I apologize. And what does he say back to her? Sorry. If I'm Amish, you don't mean to offend me. But if I'm Jewish, you do? Yeah. So the thing is that do Jews belong? Are we part of society? Are we different than society? Right? Do we have a right to live in South Africa? Do we have any less or more of a right than anyone else? So if the answer is yes, then it should be yes without any preconditions, my friends. Reminds me, my father says when they're trying to get out of Russia. Right? Russia was a tough place. So once one of the KGB officers or Soviet official was interrogating them, and he says, what do you mean you have freedom of speech in America? Here in Russia, we also give you freedom of speech. So my father said that his mother's response was, no, I think in America, they give you freedom after speech too. If I have a right to live here, I have a right, obviously, we're not talking about people who are harming others. We're talking about the freedom to live. And therefore, I shouldn't be afraid to have a mezuzah on my door, or a menorah at my window, or walk outside with a yarmulke on my head, or a chai necklace, or whatever it might be. That's the problem that we face. When we express our Judaism in public, whether it's a piece of jewelry or a kippah or a mezuzah or whatever it might be, it confirms for us, for the Jews around us, and even for the anti-Semites in our midst, that there's no reason really in this free country to hide our Jewishness. I know very few people who do. People, we're putting our Pesach retreat together. I'm getting phone calls from people from overseas. What's the anti-Semitism like in South Africa? And I tell them it's non-existent here, at least overtly not. Compared to America, for sure not. Because one guy said, "Can I wear my yarmulke on the streets?" I said, "Yes, you can wear your yarmulke on the streets. This is not Poland or I don't know where, Paris. In Paris, that people fear for wearing the yarmulkes on the streets, right? If anything, when we notice a rise in anti-Semitism, that's when we should be more outwardly Jewish. That's when we should express ourselves even more. And that's what Esther does in the Purim story. At the beginning of the story, she hides her identity as a Jew. But at the end of the story, she's proudly expressing her Judaism. She says, thinking Achashverosh, you want to know who's a Jew? I am a Jew. It's my people. So the idea of being, this concept, this idea of not being different, you know what? This country is the rainbow nation. They want to call America the melting pot of societies. In a rainbow nation, everybody should be able to proudly wear their color, so long as they are not causing harm to anybody else. That is the way. And the benefit of celebrating our distinctiveness is not only to ourselves, but I believe it benefits everyone else too. Because if we cower, we are giving into the idea that a majority should be able to taunt any minority into silence. If we do not cower, if we maintain our distinction, then we help the world embrace the dignity of difference. I'm going to go through all these wonderful, beautiful articles. Here's one interesting. This comes from Cecil Roth, The Jewish Contribution to Civilization. In this fact, perhaps lay the greatest service of the medieval Jews to mankind. It was a period when authority was triumphant in the intellectual sphere, when thought was circumscribed even more than practice, when uniformity had established itself, not as an accident, but as a principle throughout European life. Had this state of affairs continued unchallenged, progress, scientific as well as philosophical, would have been impossible. The mere fact that the Jew existed and that he preserved the habit of independent thought helped to save the world from this menace. It was impossible even for the least original mind to fail to realize that in the Jewish quarter there existed a class. Just a second, guys. Sharon, how's it? Okay. All right, without reading you this whole idea, simply by being proud to be different, we have presented this idea, and I think helped everyone else. You be who you are, and I'll be proud of who I am. Yep, absolutely. To embrace the dignity of being different. You know, the Kotzker Rebbe once said a statement. He said, if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I, then I am not I, and you are not you. But if you are you because you are you, and I am I because I am I, then I could be I, and you could be you, and now we could drink. What's he saying? How often are we trying to be something we're not? Just be yourself. Everyone else is taken. That's what he's saying. So the outward Jewish posture, I think, is the idea that we get in the Purim story. You know, an obvious question about Achashverosh's attitude towards the Jews. Haman had attacked the Jewish people because of our separatism. Right? Haman says, this nation, they're different, they're a fifth column. And he says to the king, it's not worthwhile for you to keep these people. Achashverosh, he says, okay, he approves. And then Esther goes to the king. And what happens at the end of the story? Invites him to the first party and then to the second party. And then finally reveals to the king that she is Jewish and she pleads for her people. And the king is enraged about the plan to kill the Jews, and he has Haman killed. I don't understand what's going on here. What changed? We haven't changed. What changed? Why is he changing? Why does Achashverosh suddenly decide to spare the Jews? If he loved Esther, then he could have chosen to save her and left the rest of the Jews to be exterminated by Haman. So I want to share with you a beautiful answer from the Rebbe. How Esther demonstrated to her husband that, after all, I'm Jewish. Is this what you want to eliminate? Is this what you want to get rid of? This is what we discussed in last week's shir. How Esther shows the king. For, as she said, may my life be given me and my petition and my people, my request. And just like Esther, each of us has the opportunity to serve in this role as well as Esther did, to demonstrate what is a Jew. If our Jewish identity isn't the secret, if we are proud of who we are, in a rainbow nation, there's enough colors for all people to be proud of their identities, then we can answer the anti-Semites. And the best antidote is knowing that you are a good person, that you are a Jew, and that your goodness is linked to your Jewish identity, to your upbringing, to your way of life, to your morals, to your ethics, to your standards. That it's insufficient that they just know that you're a good person, because they could say that, oh, you're good despite your Jewishness. Okay? Anti-Semites will always say, oh, there's always the good Jew too. Now, you know the old joke about the difference between the anti-Semite and the Jew? The Jew loves the Jewish people, but hates certain neighbors, friends, and relatives who are Jewish. The anti-Semite hates all the Jews, except for his lawyer and doctor and accountant. When we can be proud of our identity, right? And demonstrate to the world what that means. What is a Jew indeed? And let me give you an example, a modern example of this effect is Muhammad Dajani. He was born in 1946 in Jerusalem. He spent years as a committed anti-Semite and was a senior Fatah operative. In 2014, this same man, as a professor in the Quds University, he led a trip of Palestinian students to Auschwitz, first of its kind. By the way, he was fired for his crime. What triggered his change? I want to read that to you. Here are his words. He said, I started going with my father to Hadassah in Kerem Hospital for his chemotherapy. This man is a Palestinian professor at Quds University, and his father, being a resident of Jerusalem, was being treated in a Jewish hospital. And to my shock, I started to observe that the doctors and the nurses treated my father not as a Palestinian, but as a patient. The doctors were very friendly, and the nurses were also. He would bring them fruit, flowers, and chocolate. And I noticed in the hospital that Palestinians are also receiving treatment, not just Jews, and that the treatment is equal. That actually awakened me to a great extent to the humanity in the other. And it also awakened my humanity. This was the starting point. Communication, conversation. The Jewish doctor did not discriminate against somebody because they're Palestinian, because maybe they're related to terrorists or anything. No. Being a good person and openly Jewish and linking goodness to your identity when people see that it's the Jewish way of life that inspires and that motivates you to do the good, then they'll be inspired by the influence of Judaism. So, my friends, we spent today, Tainus Esther, exploring the rationale or the motivation of Jew hatred. We discussed it in last week's shir too. And ultimately, we realize that we can't change, we mustn't change just because people hate us. The idea of the ditch complex that we discussed is the idea that I wanted to share with you from the Megillah. If you think about it, this explanation tells us that Jew hatred is an evil corruption of something positive. The feeling of emptiness within Haman is a good thing. It's meant, why does a person sometimes feel empty? Why? Hopefully it motivates, it inspires a person to look for something good, to find more meaning and purpose in their living. But Haman had free choice and therefore chose to corrupt that healthy drive and misdirect it in evil ways. And this point is not an accidental to this explanation. Judaism teaches that everything comes from God. And so everything must be rooted in goodness. Evil does not have an independent existence. We realize evil too comes from Hashem. And therefore, though Jew hatred is as evil as can get, at its source, yes, it's a corruption of a sense of emptiness that was meant to be used in a good way. And the Gemara tells us, Haman minat Torah minayin. The Gemara asks, where do we see Haman in the Torah? And I told you yesterday, Hamina eitz hazeh, from the tree of good and evil. No, sorry. From the tree of knowledge of good and evil, yes. So the Gemara explains that the word Hamina eitz, the tree is seen as an allusion to the fact that Haman was ultimately punished and hanged on the tree. As we know, as we're going to read in the book tonight in the Megillah. Now, here's a question. What's going on here? Why does the Talmud assume that you could find an allusion to Haman in the Torah? And the answer lies in the teaching of our sages that the Torah serves as a metaphoric blueprint used by God Almighty as the creator of the world. And in the words of the Zohar, Istakel baraisa, God looked in the Torah, bara Aman, created the world. Therefore, it's a logical imperative that anything that exists in the world draws its existence from a holy idea, and this applies even to something as evil as Haman. That's why the Talmud asks for and finds a source for Haman in the Torah. This teaching underscores how evil is nothing more than a corruption of something positive. And knowing this, my friends, hopefully leads to understand that this evil can and will be defeated. Evil doesn't exist on its own. It's a corruption of something positive. And this is exactly what the prophet Yeshayahu, Isaiah, foretold millennia ago. What did he say? The gar ze'ev im kesev, im keves, that a wolf will live with the sheep. The gomer in gedi, and a leopard will lie down with a young goat, because a time will come when all the evil will come to an end. We might not be there yet. The world is still seeing terrible situations. But the Gemara tells us that these words might be metaphoric, might be figurative, right? They might be, that it's not necessarily literal. But the interpretation of the prophecy is that the world will be at peace. That's the ultimate idea. Yeah? Sure.
that you will even find in animals that are so different from each other. They are big and small together, and you're starting to find so much of them feeling compassion for the small one. So it's not
Yeah.
so far-fetched.
Yeah.
Okay, because we've seen it already in animals, and it's a sign
It's true.
of what's coming.
Absolutely.
So whatever Hashem puts in front of our eyes, it's the message for us to see.
Mhm.
This is what is coming.
Yeah. So certainly when we're there in our microcosmic world, being there for another and helping and making a difference, I think ultimately we are bringing about light in the darkness. And so I think it's our message and mission, despite the struggles and challenges of our history, now more than ever, that we have to be a light, that we have to bring light into the darker places. And perhaps we did not have the opportunity to do so until recently. Right? Till a few decades ago, anti-Semitism was so rampant. And now we have the opportunity to do so. So I think that the message and lesson for us is that we have to fill the void. You know the famous story of the Alter Rebbe when he was in jail and asked by the minister, Ayeka, well, how do you understand this word? Right? We could be an inspiration to others, and we ought to be. That's the question. Just as God asks Adam, where are you? I think this is the question we each have to ask ourselves. Where are we holding in our mission in life? Are we being a light to the nations? Are we being a shining light in the world?
Lesson 2.
That is
Lesson 2.
1 second.
No apologies.
I
1.
will share one more video to conclude with. And here it is. Just a second. You want lunch? Okay, lunch is coming up for those who aren't fasting in a minute.
You're my chip.
Every day we fight a battle. On the news we all stars. As history repeats itself and makes us who we are. Hate is all around.
A nation in the desert, we started out as slaves. Made it to the motherland and then came the Crusades. It's been so many years crying, so many tears. Don't you know, don't you really know? We are pushed to the ground, through our faith we are found standing strong. The Spanish Inquisition wanted us to bow, but our backs ain't gonna bend, never then and never now. It's been so many years crying, so many tears. Don't you know, don't you really know? We are pushed to the ground, through our faith we are found standing strong. We are a miracle. We are a miracle. We were chosen with love and embraced from above. We are a miracle. Extermination was the plan when the devil was a man. But the few who carried on leave the millions who are gone. It's been so many years crying, so many tears. Don't you know, don't you really know? We are pushed to the ground, through our faith we are found standing strong. We are a miracle. Every day we fight a battle. On the news we are the stars. As history repeats itself and makes us who we are. Hate is all around us, but we'll be here to sing this song. We are a miracle. We are a miracle. We were chosen with love and embraced from above. We are a miracle. We are a miracle. Oh, we are a miracle. Through it all we remain. Who can explain? We are a miracle. Through it all we remain. Who can explain? We are a miracle.